Congressman Tom Emmer joins us, the House Majority Whip. Congressman, always good to have you. You're in a battleground state. The former president thinks he has a good shot there. The present president thinks he has a good shot there. We see the same battles going on in one battleground state after another. I mentioned Michigan there as well. How do you see it shaping up thus far?
Well, in my state, Neil, and thanks for having me this morning, I'll tell you, the tide is turning to your previous, or the interview that Madison was doing. If you look at this state, in 2016, Donald Trump came within 1.5 points of beating Hillary Clinton. Granted, it was 7 points in 2020, but that's 233,000 votes. And recent polling shows a couple of things that are very telling. One, there's a poll that I saw yesterday that has Trump up by 2 points in a head-to-head, and he goes higher when you have other people in the race. More importantly, Neil, the intensity of the voters, right now the Trump voters have a 2-to-1 advantage over the Biden voters. That's got to be troubling to the Biden campaign because people are done with this horrible economy, the open border, and a world that's on fire, all caused by Joe Biden and his failing policies.
You know, Congressman, I'm sure you were among those attending this Capitol Hill powwow with all the Republicans, and Donald Trump met with them. It was his first time up there, since obviously the January 6th, the developments and everything else. That all seems forgotten now. What do you think of that?
Well, I think the Democrats really overplayed their hand over the last couple of years when it comes to President Donald Trump. Their persecution of this man, it just has had the complete opposite effect. You just heard someone at a Detroit rally waiting to get in. Americans, Neil, believe in something called fairness. And whether they like someone or not, when they see someone being treated unfairly, we don't like that. And people want justice. More importantly, they know what the economy was, they know what the world was, they know what their lives were under Donald Trump and his administration, and they now know, after 4 years of Joe Biden, that he has destroyed all of it. It doesn't matter if you're white, if you're black, if you're Asian, if you're Hispanic, if you're a liberal Jew. You may have been a traditional Democrat voter, but today you are looking seriously at not only supporting Donald J. Trump for president in November, but you're going to elect Republicans to the Senate and the House as well.
You know, he's in the distinct minority within your own party, Congressman, but you heard what Paul Ryan has to say about Donald Trump. He's not keen on him. To be fair, he's not keen on Joe Biden either. He's going to write in, a Republican name. He didn't say which, but that this guy violated the Constitution. He's well aware, from Bill Barr to a host of others, to even some of your old colleagues who were not fans of the former president, but are now. But he stands out, that is, Paul Brown, that view. What do you make of that?
Well, look, you've got people out there that they want to take certain positions. I think they're emotional positions. This comes down to a choice. 4 more years with Joe Biden, 4 more years of failed economic policies that are making it more difficult for Americans every day to feed their families and to live their lives. An open southern border that has criminals coming across on an alarming rate, in a world that's on fire, versus Donald J. Trump. That is your choice. Who had the best economy that we had seen in decades before the pandemic hit, who had the southern border sealed, Neil, and who made sure that the world that we were living in was a peaceful world. I don't think there's any question from Republicans and Democrats who are being reasonable that the Ukraine-Russia conflict never would have begun had Donald J. Trump been in office, nor would we have had the Hamas attack, the brutal attack on our friends in Israel. So I think people are smarter than these liberal Democrats give them credit for. They understand it's about their pocketbook, it's about their safety and security, it's about peace around the world, and that's why Donald J. Trump is going to get elected in the fall.
Will you encourage, Congressman, I know that he was referring to a Senate position, but that Larry Hogan, the former Maryland governor, has a good shot at turning a blue Senate seat red. Larry Trump had raised some concerns that he was not a favorite of hers. He had said some critical things about her father-in-law and, the whole past there. But Donald Trump seemed to be saying, yeah, we want to pick up that seat. I'm paraphrasing here, but he might have personal views of the governor that he might not flip over him, and the governor feeling the same way, but he wants that seat. Was that encouraging to you?
Absolutely. But words are words, Neil. In my state, you've got people who we talk about passive-aggressive behavior. We're not going to talk about what we don't like. It's great to report when people report what they don't like, what they do like. What matters here are actions. And Larry Hogan, as a Republican in the state of Maryland, had over an 80% approval rating as the governor. Larry Hogan is a great candidate. He would be a great addition to the U.S. Senate and a voice that I think people would be willing to listen to. And I think former President Trump recognizes that.
All right, Mr. House Majority Whip, Congressman, very good seeing you again. Thank you for coming in on a Saturday. We're honored. I appreciate it.
I'm Steve Ducey.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.